It's the worst political crisis in the Gulf region in decades.
ستقوم رباعية من دول أحدها بلده بحصار قطر لتطلب إغلاق الجزيرة.
To comply with a list of 13 demands, one of which includes shutting down Al Jazeera, which is based in Doha.
Basically want to close down independent journalism.
We begin this week with a look at ourselves, the Al Jazeera Media Network, which is at the heart of the current diplomatic showdown in the Gulf. A coalition of countries led by Saudi Arabia and backed by U.S. President Donald Trump is demanding that, along with making significant changes to its regional and international policies, the government of Qatar, which owns Al Jazeera, must shut the network down. Qatar refuses and says the future of Al Jazeera is non-negotiable. Ever since Qatar launched the first pan-Arab news channel, Al Jazeera Arabic, back in 1996, the network has infuriated many Arab rulers by providing the kind of news coverage that viewers in those countries, raised on a strict diet of state-controlled TV, had not seen before, at least not in Arabic. Over those 2 decades, some of Qatar's neighbours have launched their own state-funded pan-Arab TV news channels to present an alternative, more controlled narrative. The idea was to counter voices on Al Jazeera Arabic, some of which those governments say should never be offered an on-air platform, Egypt's Muslim Brotherhood being one example of that. There are as many angles to this story as there are governments involved, and with the Trump White House also in the mix, the implications now extend well beyond the Middle East. Our starting point this week is the Qatari capital, Doha. June 5th, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain all announced they will sever diplomatic ties with Qatar. 4 days later, June 9th, the anti-Qatar coalition puts 59 names, including 18 Qataris, on a so-called terror list. Qatar calls the list baseless. 2 weeks after that, June 23rd, the coalition gets specific, issuing a list of 13 demands to end Qatar's new isolation. Item number 6 on that list, take Al Jazeera and its affiliates off the air.
It's a network that rose to prominence by being critical of Arab leaders, and so it's always been a point of contention for the Saudis, for the Egyptians, and indeed for many Arab states, as it's symbolic of the bigger political differences between Qatar and the other states in the Gulf.
They have not stated out precisely which part of Al Jazeera they object to. Is it Al Jazeera Arabic, or is it Al Jazeera English, or any other of the sister organizations? They have not come out and stated this, but presumably what they have in mind is the impact that Al Jazeera Arabic has been having. This is what they truly object to, and they want to stop.
What is now known as the Al Jazeera Media Network began life in 1996 as a single Al Jazeera channel, beaming out news in Arabic across the Middle East and beyond via satellite. It broke the mold, reaching across borders, dispensing with taboos, becoming the first Arab news channel to put Israeli officials on its air. Programs like Al-Itija Al-Muwakkis, the opposite direction, allowed viewers to phone in, raise issues, and criticize their governments, not just Saudi Arabia's, in ways no Arab broadcaster had dared to before.
Arab media has been one of the key aspects of Saudi foreign policy, only because the rulers of Saudi Arabia want to avoid having pockets of criticism, of dissidents. If you go back 10 years, 15 years, Al Jazeera talk shows used to host Saudi dissidents who would attack the Saudi royal family directly. This has not happened in a very long time, but memories of Al Jazeera's role in voicing dissident opinions is still very much alive.
The most problematic thing that Jazeera did was probably give massive coverage to the Arab uprisings. Coverage on Jazeera was so deep and wide and ongoing that it helped to trigger a sense among ordinary people all over the Arab world that they had shared grievances and that they could do something about them. They did go overboard clearly in some cases in leaning towards certain positions. They tended to be sympathetic to Muslim brothers.
ويلعبون الدور الرئيسي في صناعة مستقبل مصر بعد الثورة.
They gave a lot of coverage to the uprisings, especially in Syria, and this is where they probably, the Arabic Jazeera, went too far.
There has been much debate over precisely why the coalition of countries has chosen to isolate Qatar, but much less debate as to why it's happening now. There's been a power shift in Riyadh. Mohammed bin Salman, the country's defense minister, is the new crown prince, first in line to his father's throne. Just before that, the House of Saud entertained a new American president, unschooled in the complexities of the Middle East and generally untroubled by nuance of the geopolitical kind. When Donald Trump said he and the Saudis made some tremendous deals, it was assumed that he was talking about the arms trade, but he may have been referring to a promise that Washington would back the isolation of Qatar. In the 21 years that Al Jazeera Arabic has been on the air, the Saudis and their Gulf neighbors have tried other ways to blunt its news output, initially through diplomacy and then through journalism. In 2003, the Saudis put Al Arabiya on the air, a rival pan-Arab news channel based in Dubai. Other channels, including Sky News Arabia, co-owned by the UAE and the Rupert Murdoch-controlled B-Sky B, followed.
There was a whole universe of pan-Arab satellite television services competing with each other to present the most credible news to a pan-Arab audience. This only lasted for about 5 or 6 years. What happened immediately after the measures against Qatar were announced is that the media of the prevailing countries immediately followed the ideological line of their own governments, and this was instantaneous.
It's as if by magic, right? A magic wand has been shaken or has been pointed, and every single outlet that is Saudi or UAE owned or influenced becomes overnight extremely critical of Qatar.
لماذا تفضل الدوحة دائما مخالفة القاعدة وتسعى إلى المبادرة والمناورة بعيدا عن حلفائها الحقيقيين؟
The speed and the uniformity, the homogeneity of the campaign against Qatar and Al Jazeera are irrefutable evidence of a very controlled media environment.
If there is no solution at the political level, don't expect one at the media level either. And the pressure on Al Jazeera will grow instead of diminishing. Now, the fact that I am commenting on Al Jazeera now is a reflection of the fact that Al Jazeera is going out of its way to bring in someone who's been quite critical of the Qatari behavior in my writings. But this reflects perhaps a lot more attention that Qatari officials are paying, especially at Al Jazeera, aware that perhaps it is important to make sure that all viewpoints are heard and that the debate really is maintained at a very high professional level.
The enemies Al Jazeera has made over the years, starting in Riyadh and Cairo, have lamentable records on freedom of the press. Their enabler in Washington is no champion of journalism either. And that's another way to look at this story. Because in the same way that politicians are judged by the company they keep, journalists and their news outlets are often judged by the enemies they make.
These are countries that cannot tolerate any uncontrolled media. We've known for a long time about the media in Saudi Arabia, in the UAE being controlled by the government, the way that Mr. Sisi in Egypt has ratcheted up his control over the media.
But on the other hand, look at who is standing with the Qataris. I mean, their closest ally throughout this has been the Turkish government, which over the past couple of years has closed down dozens of critical media outlets and has become one of the leading jailers of journalists in the world. So I think nobody comes out of this really well. I think what this tells you is that fundamentally this is not a dispute, this is not a crisis about press freedom, about objectivity, about bias in the media, about anything like that. It's fundamentally about power.
And don't get me wrong, I mean, within Qatar, we don't have dissident media against Qatari rulers, right? But the requirement, the demand to shut down a major international broadcaster smack of censorship, of control of information that has no place anymore in the 21st century.